Very pleased to introduce John Lord. John is a co-founder and leader in Seniors for Social Action Ontario. He's also a leader and founder of several local, provincial, and national initiatives to support citizenship, participation, and equality for elders and people with disabilities. John is an author, a founder of the Centre for Community-Based Research, and a member of the Order of Canada. So please welcome Dr. John Lord.
Thanks very much, Trish. Hello, everybody. It's good to see you. And I think people are still coming in. I've got some PowerPoint that I'd like to share with you, so I'm just going to figure out how to do that here. All right, nice to see everybody. And we're going to talk tonight about relationships and natural supports as we age. This is a really important area of discussion. And I'd like to start by just giving a little context about aging in Canada and how that relates to elder care reform, which is the major work that Seniors for Social Action has been working on for the last 4 years.
John, I'm sorry to interrupt you so early. People are asking from Ottawa if you could speak up a little bit more, get closer to the microphone.
Okay, I will try that. So I think it's no surprise that Canada is aging. How's that? That's better? Can you hear all right? So
I haven't got any more chat. I think you're good, John. So
okay.
As long as you keep speaking up.
Okay. I think it's no surprise that Canada is aging. In fact, currently there are 19% of Canadians are over 65. And you may not know, but there's a huge cohort, that's the baby boomer generation just behind me. 22% of people are between 55 and 64. So what's going to happen, folks, is in the next 3 years, over almost 25%, almost a quarter of Canadians will be senior citizens. And it's quite surprising, but now seniors actually outnumber children. That's never the way it's supposed to be. You know, so we're supposed to have lots more children than older people in order that they can support us as we get older. But so that's a major shift, not only in Canada, but in several countries around the world. I just wanted to set this context because the reality is that people are living longer. And longevity is now a fact of life for most of us. And get this, from the year 1900 to 2021, life expectancy increased from 50 to 80. Pretty remarkable, isn't it? In just over 100 years, life expectancy increased by 30 years. So that now people are often expected to live to 80, 85, 90. It's not unusual for people to live well into their 90s. You know, the baby boomer cohort should have been a call to prepare for an aging or aged society. But unfortunately in Canada, we were very slow to have a wake-up call, unlike some countries. Denmark, for example, and Japan and other European countries that started addressing healthy aging and elder care in the 90s. So I think what we want to do tonight is see what the context is for informal supports. It's true that we need formal and informal supports in place to reduce the institutionalization of elders. SSAO has been talking about this for years, that we need several good formal supports which need to be enhanced or created, things like improved primary care teams, direct funded home care, stronger community support associations, and small neighborhood homes. But here's the challenge, folks. We have very little control over the formal supports in our lives, right? Except for our advocacy, and sometimes advocacy leads to some innovative solutions, which is great. But we do have control over the informal supports in our lives, the relationships we have, the natural supports that we build for ourselves as we age. We do have control over that, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And It's important to recognize that genes play a minor role, probably about 25%, in determining how long we live. Lifestyle, environment, social economic factors are really more important. And relationships and social connections are one of the most important pillars of brain health and overall well-being. So if you look at the data on what makes people healthy, social relationships and social connections keep popping up as a major pillar. So we know that relationships enhance belonging and well-being. You know, and it's really important that we figure out how to maintain and sometimes add relationships as we age. For example, I've already lost a couple of friends who've died, and I'm so sure most of you who are 80 or older have lost friends who've died. So we not only need to maintain the relationships we have, but we sometimes need to add relationships. So we'll talk about that as well. Let me just share a cautionary tale from the BC heat dome of a year ago in the summer of 2022. Tragically, that summer, more than 600 people died in the heat wave, and most of them were well over 60 years of age. The coroner's report highlighted the fact that half of the people who died, more than half of the people who died, lived alone, most without air conditioning, and many with health issues. The coroner recommended to have a better alert system and to provide wellness checks on vulnerable adults. What received much less attention, though, was the fact that the older people who lived alone were generally socially isolated. Hundreds of people in similar situations survived the heat dome. Why did they survive? They survived the heat dome because they had people looking in on them. They had strong social networks. They had sons or daughters who invited them into their homes in another community. This same kind of thing happened in 1995 in Chicago when they had a huge heat wave, and that killed over 700 people. And a very extensive sociological book by Eric Kleinenberg showed that social isolation and limited relationships are what caused most of the deaths in Chicago at that time. I think we could say, in fact, that in certain situations, relationships make the difference between life and death. You know, social isolation is not inevitable for older adults, but the reality is that many elders have few relationships in their life. But let's recognize that we are social beings. You know, we're hardwired to be connected with other people, to move in groups, to share with other people. But we know from extensive research that social isolation impacts people's health and well-being, and that older adults are more susceptible to that social isolation because many live alone. In fact, I think the last census data, if I remember, was about 28%, might be 29 actually, high 29s, of older people live alone. So they're more susceptible, and also because many have health issues. The other thing we know is that loneliness has a huge impact on both physical and mental health. You know, loneliness is often defined as perceived social isolation, but it's well established that loneliness has significant health consequences. There have been huge studies with thousands of people in each study making a strong link between loneliness and suicide, and the fact that people who are lonely have shorter lives, and people who are well connected to their community. One study, a comprehensive study that had almost 3 million people involved from numerous countries, showed that loneliness increased the rate of early death by 26%. The U.S. Surgeon General announced about a month ago that loneliness was causing billions of dollars in the economy for employers and healthcare, and he declared loneliness in the United States an epidemic. This is pretty serious. And what we're finding is loneliness not only is affecting older adults, but we're finding that it's actually affecting the younger generation as well. People in their 20s and early 30s are also struggling with loneliness. The evidence is clear. Relationships keep us healthier and happier. And I thought one of the ways to go a little bit deeper on this is to share the Harvard study on adult development that some of you may know about. This research study actually started in 1938. Isn't that amazing? So it's been going for more than 75 years. And they initially started with 700 men, of course, from Harvard University that barely had women there at that time. And they also looked at 700 young people who lived in Boston. And then 2 decades later, they added women. And every 2 years, they checked in with people to see how well they were doing. What were the main influences in their life? Economic, finances. They looked at all kinds of things. And their report showed that social connections were the main factor, that relationships were the main factor in terms of people's health and well-being. Social connections are good for us, and that people live longer when they're more connected. Their second finding was very interesting, though. They found that the quality of relationships was the key. In other words, it wasn't the number of people you had in your life. If you had 8, 10, 15, 20 people in your life, what was more important was the people you did have were quality relationships. People you could connect with, people who cared for you, people who you could rely on. And the third finding from their study is that healthy relationships protect our brains. And this was very interesting. What they found was people who were at age 50, for example, who had strong social networks and good relationships, were much more healthy at age 80. That people who were isolated or lonely at 50 were more likely to have health issues at 80 and oftentimes had early dementia at that time too. So protecting our brains, relationships are really important. So this got me thinking about who's in my life. You know, and I've, in the last decade, been a caregiver for my partner who has a serious genetic illness. And my job is to support her. And early on, I realized, because I knew this work about the importance of relationships, early on, I began to ask people if they could be involved in my life, that they could walk with Peggy, that they could be part of a support circle for Peg, that they could visit her on a regular basis. So the who in our life is very important. And if you begin to have a who question, it begins to focus you on social connections and relationships. What are some who questions? Who can I invite? Who can I share this activity I love? Who can I share that with? Who can I call on? When you have a need, who can you call on? What I found over the years is that, because a lot of families have approached me over the years because of the work I've done on social inclusion and family capacity building, I found that people often they have a what question, right? What do I do about this? What do I do about that? And for a long time, I tried to help people with their what questions. But then I realized that the what question is often about fixing. How do I fix this? But quite often what we need to do is we need to build capacity. And the who question helps us build capacity. So I now have, in my caregiving role, I probably have 12 or 15 people who are active in my life and my partner's life in our journey with this genetic illness. That wouldn't have happened if I'd just been focusing on what. So I'd ask you to think about who is in your life. And think about strong ties, but also weak ties. Strong ties are the people you see regularly, They're people that you know and trust and connect with. But weak ties are important too. And weak ties are, the neighbor that you see occasionally. Maybe the person at the corner store that you've been saying hi to for years and years. Weak ties are important too. So what would it look like if you were making the who question central to your life? What would it begin to look like? Because I've done that and it's been very powerful. Well, I think it starts with identifying the different areas of your life, right? So family. So any of you have a piece of paper and pen, I see some of you are making notes. Write down some of the family that you're connected with now, or choose friends, or choose neighbors, or choose third places. Third places, are those informal places in community that we check in on a regular basis, right? So for example, my third places would include the library that I love and go to regularly. And I know the librarian very well as a result now. Third places might be an arena. Third places might be the local coffee shop. And I have a local coffee shop a couple of blocks from me that I go to on a regular basis. So think about who is in your life in these different spaces and places. And what I found when I work with families, I often get them to write the names down under each of these categories. And then you can do things like circle the people that you're seeing regularly now. Not very many. Oh, quite a few. Or maybe a little check beside the people that you'd like to see more often. And then you can start to ask yourself, how could I connect with them? Is it a phone call? Is it an email? Is it an invitation for coffee? I think this also brings up an important question about relationship building. And that's what I call the power of asking. Once you've identified, the people that you want in your life, that you want to enhance your life with more connections, you have to ask. And I'm the asker in my family. I think every family actually needs an asker. Somebody who can ask the neighbors. When we had 4 kids and living in a big house in a very busy neighborhood, I made sure I didn't have every tool in my garage because I wanted to ask neighbors if they could share a tool. So little things like that. The power of asking, we need to learn to ask. And as I've asked people to be part of my caregiving journey and support for my partner, nobody has said no. And many people have said, I'd be honored to help. I'd be honored to help. So remember that, folks. People want to participate. People want to help. And let me just share a sad little story that happened to me about 3 weeks ago. I was on the subway in Toronto, and it was fairly crowded, but there was one seat beside me that was open, and a dad and his son got on, and the little boy sat down beside me. He was probably 7 or 8 years old, and it was early September, so I said hi, and I said, how's it going? Are you back at school? And he looked up at his dad, and his dad looked at me and said, he doesn't talk to strangers. And the dad turned away. And I felt a sadness because, strangers are part of our lives. I went for a walk today in my neighborhood, and as I left my building, I talked to 3 people who were in the lobby and in the elevator. 2 of them I said hi to. The third I had a little chat with. When I was walking, I said hi to 3 or 4 people. And then I ran into somebody with a dog that I knew. So strangers are everywhere in our lives. So they're part of the third places, and they're part of our community. So what we're really trying to do here is build sense of community where we live and where we connect. Let me just talk briefly about belonging, and then I want to pause and see if there are any questions or comments that you have, and then we'll do a second half of this presentation. But in many ways, it's really about belonging, isn't it? You want relationships because it's going to help your health and well-being, but you also want to feel like you belong in your home, in your building, in your community. But we have in Canada right now actually a fairly significant belonging deficit. Several studies have shown that about a third of Canadians say they don't feel like they belong in their community. And that's pretty astonishing. And about 10 years ago, I started with a little team in Kitchener-Waterloo, a belonging project, because we had that data from our community that showed more than a third of people here felt that belonging deficit. So in our belonging project, we interviewed a large number of people, a number of seniors, people with disabilities, lots of different groups, immigrants. And there were a number of findings, and I can actually share that report with you if you like. It's a PDF version. We could share that when we send the email around tomorrow. But one of the things that showed is how important it is to be intentional about social connections and belonging. And what people told us is belonging isn't just about fitting in, but they said that when you belong, you can be who you are. You know, it's like your authentic self at a family party, or your authentic self, you know, at the coffee shop with your buddies. And we found three phases in our belonging project that kind of relate to the work we've been talking about, relationships. And in some ways, they're not phases. In some ways, they're, if you can think of interacting circles. And the first circle is presence. Like, in order to belong, you know, you have to be present. In fact, you have to show up, right? In fact, some people say 80% of presence is showing up. I mean, the reality is that older people often pull back from their community engagements, and that's understandable. But if we disconnect too much, then we're going to lose that sense of belonging and connection with others. So I think we really need to nudge ourselves and others, the people we love, to continue to be present. For example, my partner, you know, continues to walk every day, and she has 5 different people walk with her because she can't walk alone. Monday to Friday, she has walkers with her, volunteers, friends who care for her. So you're not only being present, but you're participating, right? You're walking with other people. Another friend of mine who has dementia attends breakfast with his buddies occasionally. And finally, it's relationship. Relationship is also the glue of belonging. Relationship is what brings it all together, right? Presence, participation, and relationships. So we could say lots more about belonging, but let's have a little pause here. Trish, are there any reflections or questions?
We don't have chat questions right now, but if people want to put their hand up, if you go to reactions at the bottom, if you just bring your cursor along the bottom of your screen, you'll see reactions, and you can put you can then click on that and raise your hand. So if anybody has a question, I'll look to see if you have your hands raised, and I'll take them in order. So does anyone have a question at this point? I think you're doing such a good job, John, that people don't have questions. Oh, wait a minute, Lorna. Lorna has a question. Go ahead, Lorna.
Sure. More of a reflection as I'm listening to this and getting a refresher on it, which thank you, John. I'm just reflecting on how our current living situation. So the idea of moving into we now live in a 55 plus community, small community. And the benefit of that is that there are intentional coffee get-togethers once a week, and a games get-together once a week, and potlucks every few months. So it's, you know, we weren't thinking so much of those benefits when we moved in, but we're really feeling it now as far as, so it's one way to be in a small community and have some connections that we wouldn't have if we were, you know, living in the more standalone houses sometimes. Kind of a neat thing.
Yeah,
that's great, Lorna. I think that's what I think a lot of people are looking for in their lives, right? We're going to talk about that more in the second half here. You're muted, Trish.
You're still on mute. Oh, she got it.
Yeah, sorry. The question's from the Unitarian House of Ottawa. Why do we stress aging in place when moving to a senior's home provides relationships?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Well, I think that's really individual preference. Personally, I prefer to be in a building. I live in a apartment building with about 44 units, people of all ages living here. I prefer an intergenerational setting for myself. I love having young people around me. But some people prefer to be with seniors, and that's fine too.
Hey, Sal, I think you have a comment.
Yeah, lovely to see you again, John.
All right, Sal.
And as always, you bring such a personal touch to things. It's endearing. And I think that we all do not realize how much power we have within us to be there for one another. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Sal. So let me continue then, and let's talk about the power of natural support. This is where I think I want to encourage us to age with social connections and sense of community. I think that's what we all want, don't we? We don't want to age in a lonely fashion or age alone. We want social connections and community. So natural supports refer to the support and assistance that flows from our social networks and relationships. So we've been talking about the power of social networks and relationships. Natural support kind of just emerges from that. The example that Lorna shared is a perfect example where there's coffee gatherings occasionally, or there's people getting together around different activities. It's important to recognize that natural supports are voluntary and unpaid. And I think caregivers, because I'm one, I have lots of stories of that these days. Caregivers asking for support is one of the most powerful ways that we can use natural supports. Inviting people to come into our lives, whether it's walking with your loved one, or whether it's visiting on a regular basis, or supporting or creating a support circle. Now, in the last couple of decades, there's been four major approaches to enhancing older adults' natural support systems. And I'm sure there are more than four, but I'd like to just touch on each of these briefly, and then we can have an open conversation and discussion about them. The four I'd like to share are sharing housing options, supportive communities, support circles, and connecting initiatives. I think what underlies each of these is the idea of intentional community, where people are getting together because they value relationships and they value connections, and they're building an intentional community. And you know, that usually doesn't happen naturally. That requires somebody to take initiative, somebody who has the intention to make it happen. So let's explore our first one, and I called it Boomers Explore Shared Housing Option, because I think what we're going to see, because the boomers have set a lot of trends through the last few decades, I predict that the boomers generation is going to be really into more shared housing options. And the first one I'd like to share is, this isn't my title, this is their title. 4 women in Port Perry, Ontario, call themselves the Golden Girls of Port Perry. And some of them have actually shared in previous webinars that SSAO has put on. But it's a really interesting model. 4 women got together to buy a home, and they renovated, so each of them have their own living areas. And they also have a common area of kitchen and living room and dining room. And it's a very interesting model because they have their independence, but they also have the collaboration and living together and sharing food a couple times a week if they want to. What the women say they find most gratifying is the companionship and how their worlds have expanded with new friendships and connections. Isn't that great at an older age? Because all of these women in their late 60s and early 70s. Another group that I love is called Radical Rest Homes. And I'm just going to give you the names of these, and they all have websites, and you can follow up and find out more resources. But the Radical Rest Homes people in Montreal, what they do is they promote a similar vision to live, to where and how we live as we age. And they work with older adults to help them create self-directed shared homes, they call it. Self-directed shared homes, which are managed by the people who live there. Janet Torge is one of the spokesperson. She's great. If you can go on and see her on YouTube, and she'll say things like, you know what's great is we decide, quote, we decide who to live with and how to live, instead of being dumped all together with a bunch of strangers. So not surprisingly, one of the challenges that Radical Rest Homes face is trying to find developers who support this model and will be willing to create homes where you would have that flexibility. Many of you will know about home sharing that started in Toronto and is now in several communities. Edmonton has a huge home sharing project, Vancouver, London, several communities across Canada. And home sharing started in Toronto several years ago when the City of Toronto Planning Department did a study and found that there were more than 2 million unused or empty bedrooms in the city. Isn't that amazing? So they figured, well, let's use those empty bedrooms. Let's figure out a way to do that. So they developed home share program, which links students with older people. And this is a very powerful way, I think. I've interviewed some of the people from home share. I think it's a very powerful way to reduce elders' isolation, build intergenerational connections, and also provide supportive, affordable housing for students. Seniors for Social Action had a webinar on co-housing, which is a really important area, so I won't say much about it, except it's where people get together and build a number of housing units with common space. So you can have your own unit, but you have this common space where you might meet 2 or 3 times a week. You might share meals occasionally. You might have recreation and leisure space. And it's interesting, they found that this really supports the idea of interdependence. And research shows that people are very willing to share and support each other as neighbors. And in a German co-housing project, older residents were found to be much healthier than people who were living on their own. Though there's several groups, including, I put Ottawa there because there's a terrific group in Ottawa called Soul Sisters, which you might want to follow up on if you're interested in developing a co-housing unit. So these are just a few of the ways that I think we're going to see shared housing options explored a little more in the future, especially when you think about 28% of older people living alone. And so many of them, many of us may decide that we prefer to live with other people. And there's now real options and very good resource people across the country who can help you to do that. The second thing that we're seeing is supportive communities in apartments and condos. I think I mentioned before that I live in a 44 unit apartment, a rental. And during the pandemic, I had written an article in our local newspaper about the importance of supportive communities. And I got a call from one of my neighbors, And she said, John, let's make that happen here. So we started with eight of us who got together and started talking, and we realized that we didn't know much about each other. And so we started to share emails and share phone numbers, and we decided to keep meeting and invite other people. And now we're about 16 or 18 of us meet on a regular basis. We have each other's emails and phone numbers, and we have a real supportive community. When we meet, we share appetizers. You got to have food when you meet. That really helps. So this actually all started, this whole idea of supportive communities started with the whole idea of natural occurring retirement communities. And these are, you know, if you look at Ontario, about 20% of our neighborhoods now have at least 40% of adults over age 55. So if you think about that, if you have an apartment building with a fair number of older people, you can draw them together and start to think about how we could have activities together or how we could share supports for each other. Probably the most interesting and the most well-developed NORC, they call them, is the Oasis Senior Supportive Living Program in Kingston. It's a very interesting program. And the research they've done well, let me just say, it's one building with quite a few older people who've gotten together, and they have, one of the things that's really important is you have a common area. So there's a common area where they can get together. They have a meal at least once a week, and they find that they focus on three major things: facilitating better nutrition, reducing social isolation, and promoting physical fitness. So they have activities and fitness classes every week. Now, what's interesting is Queen's University has worked with Oasis, and now they've got a grant to expand the program to 12 other communities across Ontario. So if you check the Oasis website, you'll see some of the material there, and you can find out if there's a naturally occurring retirement community in your community. The Queen's research shows that when people live in these kind of settings and support each other, there are less emergency room visits and less hospitalizations. Not surprising, eh? And I would guess, as the research goes on, much less institutionalization. Residents in Kingston report they are happier, healthier, and less lonely than other adults. And family members, and this is an important point, family members also appreciate that their older relative is being well cared for. So how do you create a supportive community? It goes back to some of the things we talked about before, right? Asking, inviting people to get together. You can start with a small group and then ask your landlord or the condo owner if there's a common space that you could share for regular get-togethers. And then share phone numbers, share emails. And I don't think that NORCs, even though they're called retirement communities, I don't think they have to include only older people. In fact, our supportive community includes people from 45 to 85 and all kinds of ages in between. So I think there's a potential for it to have some co-generational connections as well. The third thing to talk about is support circles. When my partner got the diagnosis of her genetic illness, we immediately formed a support circle. And a support circle is an intentional community. It's really, the purpose is really to build an intentional community that provides both practical and emotional support. And what you're really doing is you're inviting close family and close friends to come together around the person. In my case, our support circle is really around my partner and me, because I need a support circle too as a caregiver. So it's an intentional community that provides practical and emotional support. It also provides problem-solving support because there are issues that come up that you need help with. You can bounce ideas off the people that love you. And planning. It can help you plan for the future. You know, the world of disability has been using support circles since the middle of 1980s, and thinking about Judith Snow, one of the leaders of that in the 80s and 90s, and a lot of her colleagues and friends, some of whom are on this call tonight, actually. But there are many benefits, and the research has been done on people with disabilities who've had support circles, shows that support circles help relinquish some of the caregiver demands that I'm having, that I have people walk with my partner every day. That helps me. Support circles create a better sense of community for the person and their members. You know, Brian Goldman, some of you will know him from CBC, has written a wonderful book about teamwork. And in that book, he describes for years supporting his sister with dementia and how he's built a team. And it really is, a support circle is really a team around the person as they age and as they receive elder care. So what are the key ingredients of successful circles? And I'm sure there are people on this call who could talk about this even more than I could, but in my experience, there are 3 or 4 things. One is asking the right people. You have to take your time, make your lists of potential people you want to connect with, and think about, who could I really trust? Who would be good to be there for me? You know, I also have a daughter with Down syndrome who's had a support circle for, I think it's 28 years now, pretty remarkable. And some of the initial people, 3 or 4 of the initial people, are still there. And we've obviously added other members. But during the course of those 27, 28 years, we've invited 22 different people to be part of her circle. Only one of them said no, but she said, oh, I can do other things. And the other 21, almost everybody said, I'd be honored. So that's, again, comes back to asking, right? The power and importance of asking. Another important thing to do with a circle is to have a good process for meetings. So you gather people together, make sure you have food, make sure it's time limited, make sure that there's a good process, that people feel engaged. Because if people feel engaged, if people feel listened to, if people really respect each other in their conversations, they'll come back. They'll want to come back. They'll look forward to having future meetings. So one of the things that really helps is having a good facilitator, somebody who can facilitate the meetings and keep them on track and help with some follow-up. And I think what happens in a successful circle is, over time, you see deepening commitments and more practical support over time for the person, for the loved one. And we have circles now that have been going for years and years, and they really do make a difference. They really make a difference. So I think elder care and the aging world is going to catch on to circles. I think they're going to be part of our future as we think about, how do we support a vulnerable person that wants to stay out of long-term care, that wants to stay in their own home and live in the community. They want to have robust home care, but they also want to have a support circle with relationships and caring people in their lives. Finally, let me just talk briefly about creating connecting initiatives. I've created a couple of connecting initiatives in my community over the years. And there's quite a number of resources now. One of the best resources is, you may know that the UK, about a decade ago, started the Ministry of Loneliness. Isn't that great? They recognized that loneliness was an epidemic. So they stayed ahead of the curve. And they put in place a ministry that funds local communities to build natural supports with people. We're a long way from doing that in Canada, unfortunately, but community support associations, which are in most communities, could have the means to do that. And if they did, they could follow these 3 components of connecting initiatives. And actually, by the way, the Ministry of Loneliness in the UK have some terrific resources on connecting initiatives. You can go to their website. So the first thing is to reach out to lonely individuals. You may know some. I know a woman in my building who's lonely. You know, I talk to her every week. Second, understanding and responding to the circumstances. Why is the person lonely? Why are they isolated? Why has their life become reduced? And as you get to know the person better, and volunteers can do this, that's the volunteer part, then you can support people to engage in programs. We found in our initiative that we called the Welcome Home Initiative, we found that the relationship with the volunteer was the key to start. That relationship was the key. And then as that relationship developed, the volunteer then could help the person connect with other programs or community settings. I don't want to talk a lot about this, I won't have time, but I think I just want to emphasize a co-generational focus, I think, is really important going forward as we reform elder care and as we think about aging in place. A co-generational focus is a really strong support for social inclusion. And I guess it works against, in some ways, the growing segregation of elders. And I'm not against, people who want to be with other older people, but I just think we have to keep it in perspective. So, for example, did you know there are over 600 and growing long-term care institutions in Ontario? And there are over 600 and growing rapidly retirement homes in Ontario. And I want to push against that and say, how do we support social inclusion? How do we build co-generational activities and have a co-generational focus on the sense of community and the sense of belonging that people can feel? In fact, surveys show that different generations want more connection. And I was surprised to see that, but I was really pleased to see that 30 and 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds want to connect more with older people. And so I think there's great potential to build a co-generational focus. So let me conclude by just reminding us that natural supports enable people to have more social connections and more sense of community. And what the research shows very clearly is that both of these, social connections and sense of community, contribute to health and well-being. And secondly, let's remind ourselves that Seniors for Social Action is in the business of elder care transformation. And if that takes place, it would see strong, person-directed formal supports in place and an understanding and a funding for natural supports, like the Ministry of Loneliness in the UK. It would fund community support associations to nurture supportive communities in apartment buildings, to nurture support circles, to help people actually live in their homes to be able to age in place. I just created this, it's very unfinished, but it kind of captures, I think, what transforming formal and informal community supports might look like. And it begins with values. And I think most of you would agree with that. If we have strong values in place, human rights, aging in place, quality of life, person-directed supports, that should guide the formal system, whether it's home care, accessible housing, small neighborhood homes. We need that desperately in Ontario. But we also need to recognize and keep in mind that the informal natural supports that are so important. Let's build natural occurring retirement communities. Let's build strong, vibrant, diverse neighborhoods, and let's keep in mind a relationship focus. In fact, I think it's about 9 Ontario communities now have age-friendly committees. So you can connect with your age-friendly committees, and many of them in my community, for example, the age-friendly community has had a huge impact on City Council and the kind of decisions that are made in the City of Waterloo. So can we be hopeful? that change will come. You know, some of us have been working on this for a long time. I love Canadian poet Rupi Kaur. She just has beautiful poetry, and she reminds us that the road to change in the world is never ending. Pace yourself. You know, that reminds me of a one-day seminar I spent, workshop, I guess, with the Dalai Lama about 2 decades ago. That was a wonderful day. And towards the end of the day, somebody asked him, they said, you know, it's so hard. We're working so hard on these issues, and it seems that we just don't make progress. It's so difficult. And, you know, in his usual fashion, he laughed a little bit and he said, well, you know, the issues you work on today, you're planting seeds. They may not come to fruition for 25 years, 50 years, maybe even 100. That sure puts things into perspective. And I thought about that, and I thought about the anti-racism movement that's been active for over 200 years and is still required, still required. The late Desmond Tutu said once, hope is being able to see that there is light despite all of the darkness. And I think that's what we're trying to do as a advocacy group, and many of you are part of our group, is to see the light and to try to encourage people to take action and to be advocates to create more light. So for me, hope is really social connections that I have in my personal life, but also social connections in my advocacy life. And then collective action, because collective action gives us energy and gives us hope. So let's pause. I've said a lot, I've covered a lot of territory, but maybe we can have a chance to have conversation. You can do that either by putting a note in chat, and I'll turn it back to Trish. She may have some comments from the chat, or you could raise your hand and we can respond to questions.
Yes, I do, John. Thank you. And thank you for a wonderful presentation. And there are a couple of people with their hands up I'm going to get to in 1 minute. I know that people have often said to us in SSAO that people seem so much more isolated now, especially after the pandemic, that it's often difficult to get people together. They tend not to want to come to social things, or it's hard to organize it or whatever. So I wondered if you wanted to comment just quickly about that, about how you can really encourage people to come and take part in little small social gatherings, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right, Trish. I think the pandemic had a significant impact. I mean, on all of us, right? It made our lives more isolated, and in fact, we found that as well. We're kind of a little gun shy to go to big gatherings still, so we try to keep it small. You know, invite one person at a time over to your place, or I have a favorite coffee shop a couple of blocks away. I will ask people to come and meet with me for a coffee for an hour. So you can start small. It doesn't have to be big. And in some ways, I think we may never totally recapture the full engaged life that we used to have, because the pandemic is still here. The pandemic is still with us. So,
Yeah.
but please nudge yourself and nudge your friends to continue the social connections.
Yeah. We have 3 questions that I'm going to go to, and then I do want to call on the folks in Ottawa at Unitarian House to just say a word or two about their group and their organization. So Lynette, and then Michael, and then is it Gila? I don't want to mispronounce Gila. Okay, and then Gila. So let's go. Lynette, you had a question about experiences of people with dementia. Is Lynette there? Are you unmuted, Lynette?
No, I'm muted now. Yeah,
Okay.
my question is really about people with dementia. I have a sister-in-law who, doesn't want to do anything. And I'm just wondering if from your experiences, you could help me with some ideas.
Well, that's a tough one. There are probably people on the call who have more insight on that than I do. But I do find, and from my experience, that scheduling is very important. I find with my partner who has a genetic illness that includes some cognitive issues, I have to organize things very carefully. Unpredictable things don't work very well. Transitions are very difficult. So I think you have to plan it carefully and then build in the supports for that plan to work, right? So if you're going to walk with somebody every day at 3 o'clock, we're planning for that. Around 2:30, we're letting the person know that we're going to be walking at 3 o'clock and your friend is coming. So I find that the routine and the structure is very important, and I hope that helps as a beginning.
John, also, if I could maybe add to that.
Sure, please, Trish. Yeah.
Music is apparently, we're hearing from our members that music is really important to a lot of people with dementia. And some people are organizing memory cafes in their areas where caregivers and people with dementia can get together, even if it's a local Starbucks or a local cafe, and have a musician come in and play. And again, as John says, preparing for that and reiterating that that's going to happen. A lot of people seem to really enjoy, people with dementia seem to really enjoy that. So, even, once a week or twice a month, if that happens, it starts to form connections with other people who are in similar circumstances. And, we have learned some things, interestingly, from the childcare community, where people have formed co-ops. Where you take care of my kid for a couple of hours so I can get out in the afternoon, and then I'll take care of your kid. Well, in this case, it's an older person or someone with dementia, where another experienced caregiver would take that on for a couple of hours, and then someone else returns the favor. So that can be tremendously helpful for people, especially if you have a few people in your life who can do that kind of thing. It's tremendously helpful.
Oh,
And
I'm really
also,
glad.
sorry, John.
I just want to comment. I'm really glad you mentioned music, because in fact, we use music a lot in my home. We love music. And in fact, there's a couple of people that visit Peg who love music. So she will sing with them and they will sing with her because she needs singing to help her with her disability. So music is a really important one.
Yeah, and I know a yoga teacher, I think in Tilsonburg, who does mindfulness breathing with somebody with dementia, comes and visits, and the person enjoys it a great deal. So I think we have to be creative. And there are some good books like Gentle Care for people with dementia, where we can get some good ideas on the kinds of things we can do, and invite other people maybe to take part as well with maybe their loved ones who have dementia, so that they get a bit of a break as well. So I hope, Lynette, that helps a little bit.
Thank you so much, both of you. Yes.
I know it's tough. It's a tough go, but a little bit of creativity sometimes, and some enjoyment for the caregiver too, because we forget too often that caregivers are left out, and they shouldn't be. They should be able to be part of something a little more joyful instead of just the tough going of caregiving. So those are some of the things that have worked for other people.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Michelle, you had a question, and then Gila.
Most it's not a question, but more an experience that I see right now. The Francophone community of the regional municipality of York is currently working towards creating a Francophone village. When you were mentioning about the baby boomers, those are mostly retired teachers and school principals, and a group of people who have decided to get together. They join with some people with money, like business people, and they are looking at buying a piece of land in the municipality of York. And the idea is to create a village, a francophile, for people who are getting older. They want to have different kinds of housing. They want to have children daycare. They'd like to have all kinds of businesses as well. And it would be not a closed community, but an open community where people can come in and do some shopping there. So they have recently started to do consultation, and I've been leading some of those, facilitating some of those consultation. And one of the questions we ask people is, what do we need to build in that place, or what kind of businesses and what kind of activities should be there? And I'll tell you, it's really around social. It's really around, even like, for example, a place like a central place where people can go if they have nothing to do and they're bored or something, a place where there are people. There are coffee shop, maybe. There could be a pub. There could be, and it's a place where people know others. And they want to have a social network over there. Everything would be connected. So when you were explaining all of that, that's why I'm looking forward to get the slides, because I will share it with them. And but they are a group with so much enthusiasm. I was also at their gala a couple of 2 weeks ago. There was a big gala in Aurora, and it was wonderful to see that energy over there. Just want to let you know about that as an example of something in progress right now.
That's
Thank you for
wonderful.
sharing.
Thanks for sharing that, Michelle. That's wonderful. John, did you want to comment or?
No, that's good.
Okay, Gila?
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me? Okay. When you talk about NORCs, you're talking about those naturally occurring high-rise buildings. We understood this to be like, if you're all under the same roof, it's kind of easy to have this community. But I live in my own home in an area that is single dwelling. And a group of us were really concerned at the number of people who succumbed to COVID here in Ontario, the elderly, more than anywhere else, you know. And so we decided, those of us who want to age in place, we're going to follow the NORC idea. How do you suggest that works in a community where it's single dwellings?
Well, let me comment briefly, and then I see Peter Clutterbuck is here, and he's actually starting one of these, so he may want to comment further. I think it could work in a neighborhood as well, because I used to live in a neighborhood with, lots of single homes. And I think, again, like in our apartment building, it starts by finding 2 or 3 people who share your vision. Okay, so you have a vision of a NORC in your neighborhood. See if you can find 2 or 3 other people in your neighborhood. Say, hey, look, is there any way we can start to get together and talk about what that might look like? And then you can have, from those conversations, then you can decide, your little group will figure it out. You'll decide, maybe you can meet with some other neighbors. Maybe you can hold a meeting and invite everybody. There's going to be different ways that you get started. But you have to reach out. You have to ask, right?
This summer, I took I made copies of a flyer and went around and gave it out to maybe 30 people.
Okay.
Come to my place for bagels and coffee on such a day. It was like, August the 13th. And I didn't know
I would have been there, Gila.
I didn't know who to expect, who not to expect. We live in an area where every street around us ends with the word wood. So like I'm on Maplewood, and it's a Humewood, and it's Witchwood and Valewood, etc., Cherrywood, all that kind of stuff.
It's the suburbs.
It was something like that, yeah, but it's in central Toronto. And I said, do you also live in the woods? Come on to my place, So it was only supposed to be an hour and a half. 28 people showed, 14 families, and we're talking every age. And they were so grateful that they got an invitation. This was the middle of summer, middle of August. And they had name tags, and people my age, 84, like appreciated that you can't remember anybody's name anyways. The tags were terrific. But where do we go from here? Like, one of the things that I did as a follow-up was, I'm Jewish, so it was the high holidays, and for a sweet new year, I gave a little this, like little honey, jars of honey. Can you see that? I don't know. Okay, and then I gave them to, neighbors, and I said, sweet wishes for 5784, which is the Jewish New Year. And I said, may our community be a model of caring, compassionate neighbors who help each other thrive, growing up, growing old, being kind, trusting, and knowledgeable. People loved it. And I got a terrific response, but I do not know how to organize. I said, maybe your place next time, but not getting that kind of follow-up. How do you find a leader?
Well, right now you're the leader.
Yeah,
And
well,
what leaders have to do is find other leaders. That's one of our roles as leaders, is to always be nurturing others and connecting with others. So I think you need to have, you've done the group thing now. Now you need some one-to-one conversations in kitchens, one-to-one conversations. But I'm wondering, Peter Clutterbuck, are you still here?
Yes.
Whether you might want to comment, because I
Yes,
know
Peter's
you're
got
working
his
on
hand
your-
up, so he's next. But Gila, just to add to what John said, you are a leader. I know you're a leader because you've already pulled people together. The other thing, though, is that it's those individual conversations where you ask people, what do they think should happen next? Like, what would help build community? You might get some very interesting responses from people if you ask them what they think might work in the community. And as soon as you've got 2 or 3 similar responses, you know that's the direction you need to go.
Yeah, that's good
okay.
advice.
Sounds like very good advice.
Okay. Peter, go ahead, please.
Yes, I know. I completely agree with the idea that you start with a few people and they figure out, what is possible to do in your community. We right now, I started with 3 other people who, as part of a community organization, did research on the situation in our community, which was a high proportion of seniors living in both apartment buildings and in their own homes that weren't really getting connected or being supported in any way, with no common place to meet. We called our first meeting during the COVID days, where you had to meet outside. We called our first meeting in a park one cool April afternoon, and there were 6 people who came, and 4 of them were the 3 leaders and me. But we talked to the people about our ideas, and they liked our ideas. And they said, "Don't worry about getting more people next time. We'll go back and talk to the people who we know." And we built from that to actually getting some space in our local school, to organizing something every month where seniors would come, where we get 25 or 30 people out to do exercise, to have community meals together, to actually build. We have become the 12th Oasis project, funded by Queens, but it's not so much the funding around the staff person, it's the volunteer leadership and the connections that people have made. And we have people who are we have very culturally and racially mixed community. We have people who are very low income and renting. One of our members, actually, elders, was living on the streets in February and March, got kicked out of his apartment, and our community came together and found him another place to live. And then we have a few families who go to Portugal for part of the season to their villa where they vacation. So we got a wide range of incomes, and these people have all got to know each other. We're now able to have a 2-year lease at a local school for a 3-day-a-week drop-in program that's not just being funded by Oasis, but by our other means. So you do start with like 3 or 4 people who get other people excited. It just builds momentum, and it's all about relationships. People who never knew each other before, even though they're living within the same concentrated neighborhood. It's quite amazing when you think about the fact now what's happening among this group of people. It's so inspiring to see every week when we do our activities together.
Peter, where do you live?
Thanks for sharing that. That's such a great example. And I think it really is what I often think about when I work with different communities. That's community development on the ground, right? Where people often say, well, what do I do? And then I come back to the who question, right? Who do you know? Who can you connect with? Who can you invite? And so Peter's example is an excellent one that we can start in neighborhoods, in apartments, in workplaces.
Yeah. And
Building community.
Peter is not all that far from you, Gila. With your permission, Peter and Gila, I can connect the two of you via email if you like.
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll do that for sure.
Good.
Come
Good
and
idea.
visit us. Actually, ironically, I was presenting on this in Waterloo this morning by Zoom presentation to about 20 people for your Waterloo age-friendly group. So I
That's
talked
great.
about this morning.
I knew you were going to be here, Peter. I'm glad. But that linking that Trish just did, that's another important strategy in terms of expanding relationships into community, linking people together.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to end the evening without our wonderful folks from the Unitarian House in Ottawa. So Mo, I think you were going to say a few words as well. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So we live in an unusual seniors residence. It's a not-for-profit, which is unusual. And it shows that we're not here to make somebody some money. We're here to make our lives better. We have 2 levels of care here. We live independently in apartments in the 1 level, and in the other level, we live in a floor where there's nursing support. It's an intermediate level. It's not long-term care. The thing that's very different here, there's about 150 of us, by the way, is that volunteering is huge in this building. So in addition to having the activities that the house puts on, that's part of our expectation as seniors living in such a place, the residents themselves volunteer and are free to start volunteering initiatives. And as a result, we have many more social, helpful, and educational opportunities. We have a beautiful garden thanks to our residents' work, and that's as an example, but there are all sorts of activities that go on, as well as the kind of social things you expect, such as bridge groups, Scrabble groups, etc. As volunteers, we find that not only are we helped by others, but we feel empowered, confident, still useful in the world. At the same time, because we live in a retirement residence, we also feel supported by the very able and capable and interested staff that we have here, very friendly too. Not only do we enhance the lives who can easily make contacts and mix with others, but we also enhance the lives of quieter, shyer individuals. And what we find is that our volunteering activities lead to a community in which we naturally look out for each other all the time. One possible problem that comes because of COVID is that less mixing with younger generations, though of course many of us have families who visit. But we do have a daycare on the site, and there are plans to start interacting with them more. There's also a church on the site. And that's about it in brief, I think. Thank you.
That's
Okay.
great. Thank you, Gila. And there are
Yeah.
many ways of connecting, and it's a choice. It's a choice that people make, as John mentioned earlier. It's a matter of personal preference. As long as people aren't forced into the choices, so-called choices that they're making, we're all for it. We think people should have a wide range of choices, and make their decisions accordingly. So, John.
Well, I just wanted to add that I appreciated the emphasis on volunteering, and you know that the latest census data showed that 32% of Canadians over age 60 actually volunteer. And it's a very powerful way to connect with your community, to get to know people in your community, and to choose an activity or an area. Like I have older friends who are volunteering around climate change initiatives, and other older friends who are volunteering around some of the aging issues, looking at forming small homes for elders. Like there's so many different areas where we can volunteer, and it's a way to connect and keep yourself active in community life. It's very important, I think. So I'm glad you
NOCs
mentioned that.
involved as well, yeah. And NOCs involve volunteering, of course.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. And if I can say, Seniors for Social Action Ontario couldn't have done a quarter of the things that we've done had it not been for, there's another way that people have gotten together and formed a lot of very strong connections. And John, interestingly enough, John and I go back probably 40 years because of advocacy work that we were doing in the 1980s. So those kinds of relationships can also be enduring, because that's how SSAO came together. People who worked together 40 years ago got back together again and said, we have to do something about this. And everybody answered the call. So it was really quite impressive, and just have to thank everybody for that. So John, did you have some final words before I give you a well-deserved thank you?
Well, just to say thank you all for being here, and I appreciated the questions and wish we had more time for conversation, but there'll be another day.
There will.
And good luck with your relationship building and your intentional community building. That's what hopefully you've left with nothing else. Hopefully that will be a takeaway for tonight.
Yeah. John, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. It's been very inspiring. And it's wonderful also to have heard people respond in kind and share their experiences also of trying to pull people together. I know it's not always easy. I think this is where persistence pays off. And John, you certainly have persisted for many, many years. So I want to thank you also for all of that you have done for so long now. So thank you again. And Peter, I think, did you have your hand up? I can't see you at this point.
I have
No.
my hand up.
I think, okay, Gila and Peter, okay.
I wanted to know how to access the recording of this so I could show it to others. How do you do that?
We're going to send it out tomorrow, and it'll be on our YouTube channel.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, all right, Peter?
Well, actually, my hands are just clapping for John's fantastic and direct and clear presentation on the whole theme and topic. I really value it, and I know, having worked with him, how that really is grounded in both personal and professional experience. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much, John, and have a good evening, and have a good evening, everybody. And just connect with us if you want to get things started. We may know people in your area who want to join you. So it's seniorsactionontario@gmail.com. You can just write to us, and if we know of others in your area who are trying to do some things, we can try and connect you.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, and everybody have a good evening.